How's it going, ladies and bruises? I'm Bob Sixkilla and welcome back to Sekimeiya. Now, we are still in Yushibana as Shidoya, one of two possibly Shidoyas, I don't even know. And apparently, we may even have one of two everybodies here who may have travelled with us, semi-travelled so far back. They might have got caught in our radius. We don't know yet. But we're still trying to figure out what we're planning to do as far as changing the past, or whether we're going to save Mia, or what we're going to do about that. Let's crack on, shall we? I felt a little dizzy after reading all of that. Probably thanks to not having eaten much the previous day. Sapped of energy, I got out of bed and steadied myself. I picked out some fresh clothing and stepped to the bathroom. I still don't have anything to eat. I could feel the demands in my stomach, given the unpleasant meat I'd cooked. It wasn't something I wanted something actually edible. It's really early. I should just go to the grocery store. Better watch out for no low quality cuts of meat before I buy them though. Sidnok was a grocery close to my apartment that I visited often, and that was my target for the time being. I knew I wouldn't be able to think properly before eating something filling. I drank some chilly bottled water and approached the heater. I guess I can leave it on. I'll be really cold once I come back. It'll be, I suppose. I grabbed my purse in the living room. In the entrance, I made sure I wasn't forgetting anything and picked up my keys. I had my wallet too, so I put on the boots and coat that I'd left next to the door. It wasn't snowing that day either, and my street seemed empty. I went down the stairs and walked ahead. The direction was the same I'd taken the previous day, but Sidnok was located before the centre of Yushibana. I recognised the wide tyre marks on the snow. Once a week, a garbage truck would pass through my street and collect the grouped up cans further ahead. I guess the lady at the store also knows me. I didn't know her name, or if she was the owner of that place, or just a cashier, but she was usually at Sidnok when I went. I wondered if she'd say anything, as I'd never really spoken to her. Normally, after leaving my house with the heater on, the outside would feel very cold. It was a little bit warmer than I expected, so I kept a steady pace. I saw more clouds above me, as white as the ground. After walking for a bit, I still hadn't seen anyone in the street. After firmly pressing down on the snow with a step, I brought myself to a halt. Still looking upwards, I was staring at the structure that reached higher than the others. I'd seen it throughout my entire life, but I'd only recently entered it for the first time. I remembered having been told before that it was visible from any place in Yushibana, and I'd just seen it was the truth. I guess when we were inside of it, all of Yushibana could see us. From where I was, I could only see a few of the higher windows, but it was enough to notice that there were no shutters covering me. I looked at it for a while, my mind blank. It seemed there was no light on the other side of the windows. As Katai had said, nobody had been recently working on those floors. I shook it off and kept going. I was already pretty close. As I got closer to the busier centre of town, more and more tyre marks crisscrossed the snow. I could see the shop ahead of me, and I shortly arrived in front of it. Hello? Good morning. I walked past her. The streets had been desolate, but I saw someone I didn't recognise picking up cereal in an aisle. She didn't say anything. I figured not everyone had seen the news, and even if she had, she didn't have to mention it. I knew where everything was, so I kept walking as I wondered what to get. I really wanted to use my time well, and I never felt like cooking. I stopped in front of the stand full of instant food. I'll get tired of these if it's the only thing I buy. They're all instant noodles. I frowned a little, but there was nothing to worry about. On the 8th, I'd gone home from the hospital. But if I'd been late, and I'd eaten a little before leaving, I don't think that I'd check the kitchen, where I could have seen my food supply. And even if I did, I could simply be changing the past now. It keeps occurring though. I went to buy food without the intention to change the past, and it happened to match what I already lived through once. Maybe it really is correct that everything will happen as it did if I don't purposely think about changing anything. But that doesn't make complete sense. I've already made one change by calling my mum. So now everything can't really happen as it did, as long as I don't intend otherwise. Down the line, more things are bound to differ. I sighed, picked up a few packs of instant noodles without any special flavouring, and wandered around the shop. I hadn't grabbed a cart, so I soon found myself carrying noodles, cookies, milk, chips, almonds, and my favourite cereal bars. I should get meat too. I felt a little reluctant to buy more after the 2 pieces I'd eaten. I stared through the transparent door of the fridge. I didn't feel like looking at the eggs, so I scanned the scarce meat that there was. I guess I'll just have to eat these up. I lifted up the top and grabbed some prepared meat. I knew I'd seen the same brand at Atsuki's house. Careful not to let anything fall, I stepped up to the cashier and dropped everything on the conveyor belt. It would all last me a few days, but not until the 15th. She quietly scanned all the items. It'll be 2,739 yen total. Give me a plastic bag too, please. Here. I grabbed my wallet, but I knew I barely didn't have enough cash to pay for everything. I took out my credit card instead and handed it to her. She inserted it into a tiny device and asked me to put in my PIN. 1991. I pressed OK and waited a few seconds. Alright, thank you. After she handed me the receipt, I put everything in the bag and walked out. The other shopper had left at some point, but the outside was as devoid of life as before. I retreated my footsteps to make it home. I'd already done what I wanted, so I moved slower, trying not to exhaust the minimal energy I still had. I took the keys out while I went up the stairs. Opening the door caused the heat stored inside to leak out, so I moved in quickly. I left the bag on the floor and to take off my coat and shoes and brought it to the kitchen. Except for a portion of noodles, I put everything in a low cabinet in the fridge. I didn't have any way to obtain hot water, so I put some in a pot and placed it on the gas stove. I tended to cook with bottled water because I didn't particularly trust tap water. Fortunately, I still had plenty of bottles left. After grabbing the chopsticks, I waited for the water to boil. I didn't need it to get overly hot, so as soon as the tiny bubbles began to form on the surface of the pot, I turned off the stove and poured the water into the bowl with the noodles and other ingredients. Within 5 minutes, they'd be cooked. As usual, I brought the bowl to the living room and left it on the table. I hadn't turned on the light, so the gaps in the blinds did all they could to illuminate the room. I felt much more comfortable not having my window exposed to anyone outside of it, and the lighting was preferable anyway. Nonetheless, I still turned on the ceiling light to force myself to be more awake. I tried to simply wait for the noodles to cook, but it was hard not to remember what I'd read. Who had written those posts? And where had they been on the 15th? Since they travelled back on that day, 2 versions of them should have existed. That's some nice looking instant noodles, man. They don't look very instant to me. My mind clouded as soon as I tried to think about it. So I knew it was a bad idea trying to get anywhere before eating. I poked the noodles with the chopsticks, but I had to wait a little more. Enough time had probably passed, so I brought some to my mouth. The instant noodles we get around here are pretty shit by comparison. They were good, and not too hot either, so I continued. The issue with those packets of ramen was that there wasn't much in them. It only took me about a minute to finish. I tried not to wolf it down so fast, but it had at least been what I needed, because my mind started regaining some focus soon after beginning to eat. Maybe I could try to figure out who posted that thread. When I got that idea, I put the noodles on hold and walked to my bedroom. My phone was still next to the pillow, so I grabbed it and flipped it open. 7MDAG's profile was still there. As I walked back to the living room, I pressed the return button. I left the phone on the table and continued eating. As soon as the page loaded, I navigated to the bottom of it. Yeah, this picture. I could try to pinpoint where it was taken from. The angle was from a little high up, so it was likely taken through a window of an apartment. In Yushibana, most apartments didn't have different floors, so it was likely that if I simply found the place that I'd taken it from, I could also find out who lived there. Actually no, I know this street. That's where there are a few slightly higher buildings, so they should have more than one floor. This is close to Atsuki's house. I ate the remaining noodles, scratching the bottom of the bowl so that none were left behind. Would knowing who this person is be useful? It might be. I'm not sure how much I can do. I really doubt I could stop the incident from happening myself, but I should try to learn as much as I can about it. What really happened on the 15th? There were a lot of strange things about the attack. There's also the chance the person who posted the thread is someone I know. If I manage to travel back in time again, as long as the incident occurs, even if Atsuki and I don't go, it's very possible this person will still have travelled all the way back. I'll definitely have to go to the tower before the 15th. I guess the ideal situation is that I'll be able to touch the Sekimeiya and go far back enough to save Miya. Most likely, the biggest issue right now is not knowing how to make myself go so far back again. But, if I can pull that off alongside saving Miya, the ideal scenario would be to obtain the Sekimeiya myself. What if I go many days to the past? Before the 27th, I could find the Sekimeiya on the mountain, which would save Miya and prevent the incident from happening. I suppose Ashiya would find a replacement for the Sekimeiya to bait Shin, but that doesn't really matter, as long as people don't get trapped with something that causes time travel. That could outright stop any deaths from happening just by itself. I walked to the kitchen and left the bowl in the sink. I still felt hungry, so I took the chocolate cookies I bought out of the cabinet. If I find the person behind the thread, maybe I could speak to them. They could still have important information if they merely travelled from outside the tower. It's also possible other people will try to get in touch with them, now that the Sekimeiya has been announced officially. There are a number of reasons why finding out their identity would potentially be useful. If even one of them was correct, that was enough. Should I go there and knock on the door, hoping it's the right one? We gave our names to Surupo when we talked to him, so this person could potentially recognize mine. Would it be a good idea to say that I've experienced the same thing as them? I lay back on the carpet, a bit indecisive. I also kept thinking that before the 15th, if I haven't been able to use the Sekimeiya, I'll prevent Atsuki and myself from going to the tower. How exactly do I plan to do that? There's no way writing an anonymous note would be enough. Just say, don't go. Oh, actually, it should be simple. When I woke up in the hospital, it was the afternoon of the 8th, and Atsuki was there, so I know for a fact that I'd be out at that time. I could go to his house and take the tickets we bought. The 3 of them should be in the purse Mia used, and the pamphlet advised people to hurry before they ran out. There were so many people at the tower, with the shutter closed, that I bet they sold out too. We didn't look at those tickets again until the 14th, so they'll definitely be too late to buy any new ones. I should be able to enter his house when he's out. I know where he keeps a hidden key close to his door just in case he ever forgets his inside. If he's not there anymore, I might be able to open the window of his bedroom, as long as his shutter isn't down. He doesn't usually lock it. I spent a while lying down, but I began to feel really curious about the mysterious forum poster, wondering if there had been an ulterior reason behind their text. I put my phone in my purse and walked to the entrance. My boots and coat were where I'd just left them, so I put them on and stepped out, then headed down the stairs. I knew approximately where to go. Once I was at the street where the picture had been taken from, I expected to be able to look at it and determine the exact building I was searching for. I could take different paths to make it to the opposite side of town, but I simply walked, as if I was going to Atsuki's house. His house and Ashiya Tower were both in the distance, but they were also on opposite sides. The tower was right in front of the mountains, whereas Atsuki's house was right near the road to leave Yushibana. As always, the centre of town felt much more lively. At a crosswalk hidden by the snow, a car waited for people to cross. That time, instead of going with them to Ramen Street, I went directly to Enric Avenue. I chose not to walk past Atsuki's house and kept moving ahead. If I wasn't mistaken, the street I was going to was called Ampla, and it was parallel to Enric. Wait a second. Thinking about the movements I'd made the previous day, what could have been an important connection arose in my mind. The forum thread had been posted on November 24th. I'd also read about that date in the newspaper. Also, on the afternoon of November 24th, a camera had recorded a prisoner escaping from a cell. One of the unsolved questions about that was the way the prisoner had gotten into that cell. Was I actually right? Was it the Sekimeiya's teleportation? If the person who posted the forum thread was outside the tower on the 15th, like I thought, someone must have touched the Sekimeiya from inside. That means that both of them must have appeared at the very same time on November 24th. It fits perfectly. Someone else who'd been caught up in the travel had appeared inside a vacant prison cell. Was it the person who touched the Sekimeiya, or someone else who was waiting outside? I remember reading that they were dressed as a prisoner. This must mean that the position they appeared in was based on a time that they were locked up, right? Had one of us in the tower been in prison in the past? I attempted to recall a picture next to the article. It had been taken from the ceiling, so measuring the person's height with it was very hard. Since it had been in black and white, I couldn't discern the colour of their hair either, so all I knew was that they were a man with short and dark hair. It's not possible it was a police officer waiting outside. If that was the case, they wouldn't have appeared dressed up as a prisoner. Just going off that fact, it's probably incredibly likely it was one of us who were inside the building. So, someone else who got trapped and knows about the Sekimeiya's powers is here, in the past with me. This should be confirmation of what I've been fearing. I bit my lip and tried to keep walking. I'd already thought of the negative implications of that, but I had to start seriously worrying about them. If they've been in prison before, their reason to be in the tower must have been to steal the Sekimeiya. There was nobody there who didn't end up understanding what its powers could do, so now that person must be entirely aware of the fact that they're in the past. They have the ability to change the past and know about Ashiya's alarm. At any point, I could hear the news that the Sekimeiya has been stolen before the 15th. I tried to calm myself down, but it wasn't easy. If Shin or anyone stole the Sekimeiya, the incident on the 15th wouldn't happen. The deaths of that day would be erased, but an alternate outcome like that came with its own problems. I wouldn't be able to save Mia, and I would remain in a world with two versions of myself. The only way to make the latter work would become impossible as well, as I wouldn't be able to go back in time with any winning lottery number. Does this pretty much mean that I have to go to the tower as soon as possible, find the Sekimeiya and somehow activate it to go days back? They could easily go wrong in so many ways. What if I stay in front of the tower permanently to see what Shin do with the Sekimeiya once I steal it? This could also very easily end up being a mistake, and no way I could do it. It is likely that whoever travelled to the 24th thinks the past can't be changed. If so, they'll be afraid to attempt to steal it before the 15th, and they'll try to do it on the day with the information they have, just like I was thinking of doing. I guess I can hope that's the case. I left my apartment to figure out who 7MDAG was, so I did my best to let go of those worries for the moment and make it to the street that I've been going to. Well, it should be this one. I took my phone out and looked at the screen. Then I peered into the distance toward the tower. Yeah, it has to be this street. The structures around me were slightly taller than in most of Yushibana, and the number of windows showed that they had several floors. I kept walking to get closer to where I thought the picture had been taken from. Around here? I looked at the building behind me. The picture could have been taken from any of those windows. Oh, is it actually this building? There was something that made it stand out. Next to the door there was a sign with 3 words on it. Apartment for sale. I guess that doesn't have to mean anything. But I frowned a little. While I didn't know which apartment was the one for sale, light could be seen on the other side of the 4 windows above the door. The entrance was locked and I couldn't see anyone nearby. Next to the door below the sign was a panel with 4 numbers and 4 buttons to press. Should I try to ring the bell? It could be any of the 4. If the person from the forum is someone I know, maybe I could recognize their voice. I felt pretty hesitant, wondering what to say after ringing. Do I ask for a name and just say that I made a mistake if I don't recognize them? What if they live with someone else who answers instead? I looked at the sign again. There's a phone number. Maybe I should call it instead. Would I be told information about the previous resident? Could it be that the person I'm looking for decided to move out immediately, afraid of what they thought was a grave mental issue? Given the way their posts had been written, that wasn't unthinkable. Perhaps they just decided that they'd moved somewhere else, and that was why someone still seemed to be living behind every window at the moment. Still holding the phone, I pressed the call button and dialed the numbers on the wall. 1989-1815-251. I started to hear the high-pitched beeps. A little half-hearted, I waited on the phone, with the phone to my ear. Hello? Oh, hey. I'm calling for an apartment. I see for sale at Ampla. Ah, great, you're the first person to be interested, but the interior there is very well maintained, and it's a very good area. Are you from here? I am, yeah. Oh, that's great. Are you perhaps at the address right now? Yes, I'm looking at it. I can see you from my window. Wait a sec, I'll come out. Oh, alright. He hung up, so I stood still nervously, failing to see anyone behind a window. I didn't have to wait much for a door farther back to open. A middle-aged man came out and shuffled up to me. Hello, what's your name? Shiroya. I see. Glad to meet you. I'm Cecil Frey. He bowed enthusiastically and turned to the sign. It's been up for sale for a very little time. I'm sure it'll be purchased quickly. Would you like to see the inside? Since you're from here, I'm assuming you've not seen the pictures on the website. I haven't, and yeah, I'd like to. Isn't someone currently inside though? There's light coming from all the windows. Ah, yes, you're perceptive. The previous resident is currently preparing to move out. We'd agreed he could receive visits while he's still here. Don't worry though, the place will be vacant very soon. I don't know what to say, but I couldn't back off. I'm sorry to ask this, but why is he leaving? Does he have issues with the apartment? Oh, no, not at all. Evidently he wanted to go live with his parents. I've spoken to him personally. He's a very well-mannered and intelligent person, but it seems he's not well, so he couldn't keep living by himself. It is him. I looked up, but I still couldn't see anyone through the glass. He's not well? I'm sorry to have asked. Is he going to be okay? Yes, you shouldn't worry. I'm not sure exactly what the issue is, but he was very recently at his parents' house, preparing to move. He seemed fine to me when we spoke briefly. I didn't want to pry though. Ah, I'm glad. He had 2 keys in his palm, and used one to unlock the entrance. I saw a grey hall with stairs leading up. I think he implied he had some kind of mental disorder, but I'm not really well informed. He called me in late November saying that someone had broken into his house. Wait, really? Did they take anything? No, that's what I'm saying. Soon after he called again, assuring me that he'd imagined it, and not to worry, but that he'd still move out. I followed him up the stairs with a pensive frown. He stopped in front of the first door, which had an A above it. Instead of unlocking it himself, he rang the bell. I started to feel nervous. Would the person about to open the door recognize me? Would I recognize him? I heard footsteps approaching and the door jittered. In one motion, I saw the face of the person I'd been searching for. No, I don't think I recognize him. Ah, good morning. Well, I guess it's close to noon already. Are you coming to see my apartment? Yeah. Come in then. It's a very nice place. I've really enjoyed my stay here. I didn't take my eyes off his face, but all I can conclude was that I'd never seen him before. He wore a sympathetic smile, but his voice sounded kind. I stepped in timidly, unaware of where to set my eyes. Following the agent or landlord, whoever he was, I walked to the living room. The furniture won't be taken away. You'll notice the heating is working just fine, but sunlight makes it inside all day too. You might have seen that there's no elevator below, but fortunately, you only have to go up a single set of stairs. Yeah, I like it. I wasn't necessarily lying. Everything looked clean and neatly arranged. Great, you'll see how spacious the rooms are. There are 2 of them. I kept following behind, still thinking about what he'd said in the staircase. He called, saying that someone had broken in, but later retracted that. I looked back at the man, who was just tagging along in silence. He must know what'll happen. Someone broke into this place a few days ago. He appeared at his parents' house on the 24th, and later on, he replied again from his apartment when he took that picture. Did he break into his own house? If he appeared at his parents without the keys, that's what could have happened. Maybe he did have them and his original self noticed someone had entered. There are more possible explanations. What if it was a version from the future who noticed his original self when he made it back home and thought that he was a thief? Then he figured out what had happened and called to say he just imagined it. Do you like it? He opened the door to a bedroom. Yeah, that's a big bed. As I said, everything you see here is a fixture. It's part of the package. That's good. So if I'm right at all, 2 versions of him must currently exist. Is the one right here the one who travelled from the future? Is it possible they've seen each other? Surely that would be changing the past. Here's the other room. It's a little smaller, but it can also work as a bedroom if anyone stays over. I see. This room is pretty messy, and it's still different kinds of objects and old devices. My attention was quickly directed to a framed picture. I leaned forward to take a better look at it. I could see the man who lived in the apartment in front of someone a little older than him. A police uniform. They were both dressed as police officers, and the background was a simple white wall. You have the bathroom right here. I looked through the door and saw the bathroom similar to mine. The structure of the apartment was similar to my own, but everything felt more taken care of, and the rooms were slightly larger. When we'd seen all of them, we ended up at the front door. I know we haven't spoken about price. I can be a bit flexible. Right now the set price is 42,000 yen a month, but you'll need to make an initial deposit of 126,000. How does that sound? If only. Maybe after I win the lottery. 420 a month. It's not too bad. Better than prices around here. I certainly like this place. It's a big decision, though. I'll have to think about it. Of course, keep in mind more people are likely to be interested. I know. I'll try to make up my mind quickly and call you. I've got your numbers saved now. Alright, I'll await your call. Should I? It was a pleasure. Likewise. I was about to bow, but the wide eyes of the man holding the door froze me before I could. Also frozen, the man's eyes pierced mine until I forcibly ripped my gaze away and completed the bow. Did he react to my name? Goodbye. Goodbye, I hope to see you again. The other man wasn't saying anything, so I slowly stepped away, unsure whether that look had been a reaction to my name, or if he'd had it from the beginning. It seemed both of them would stay there, so I left by myself. As soon as I turned around, I was met with the same sensation. The door to the outside closed, and I saw the man walking up the stairs. The look he gave me muddled my mind, instantly making me doubt everything I just determined. It was the very same look as the other man's, down to the piercing pause. When time continued, he stepped up and unlocked the opposite door, quietly shutting it behind him without saying a word. What the hell, what was that? He'd been skinny and a little older, but I hadn't recognized him either. So I simply stood still, wondering which of those 2 stares had been given by 7MD_AG. Was it just that he was surprised to see someone he'd never seen in the building? Had I only overreacted internally? It had seemed bizarre to me, but maybe I just misinterpreted the second look due to seeing it immediately after the first. I went down the stairs and opened the door outside in a haze of confusion. Outside, I merely stood still, trying to sort out my thoughts. The first man must have been the forum poster. What I was told about him fits perfectly. I walked away, intending to take the second stare out of my mind and telling myself that I'd really overreacted to it. I guess it doesn't really matter. It must have been one of them for sure, and I didn't recognize either of them. It's much more likely that it was the first person though. because of that picture he'd framed. He was one of the police officers outside the tower, so I was right. He really was suddenly picked up by a travel that was activated within the building. But he's a policeman. Is he not going to try and prevent the attack from happening somehow? If he made that call saying there was no actual burglar, he must understand enough of what happened to him. He has to know he's in the past. Lost in thought, I arrived at Ramon. In contrast to the early morning, the street was fairly busy. Partially thanks to the good weather, I recognised a group of kids years younger than me, so I avoided even looking at them. And like I thought, currently 2 versions of him must exist. I can't be sure I just talked to the one aware of the incident. But the stare stuck in my mind strongly implied that he was. I wondered whether to go home. I'd accomplished my goal. Even though I couldn't draw much from it, I hadn't recognised the person known as 7MD_AG, but I felt confident that the mystery behind the forum thread had been the police officer who travelled through time. Maybe I should have tried to talk to him. I doubt I would have learned anything though, and I'd very much rather not say what I'm doing here. With that out of the way, I was forced to go back to my previous thoughts. What could I do about the person who probably travelled with him to the prison cell? I wandered around slowly, hoping something would come to mind, knowing that the future I was envisioning could have been destroyed at any moment, causing a hollow anxiety to spiral in my chest. It was the same one I'd felt after Mia died. At least I was pretty sure that I was in the best place to sort it all out, not inside an oppressive, enclosed building, but free in Yushibana. When I thought about it more, it was almost worse in a way. Mia had died instantly, and I'd been forced to confront that reality instantly. Similarly, in Ashiya Tower, the attack had been instant, and all the consequences of it had been fairly quick to follow. But what I was doing then, walking around town slowly gathering information, was not the same. If I didn't save Mia through my actions, all I was really doing was letting things slowly play out, gradually getting worse. Distracting myself from that was the best I could do in the meantime, while I decided whether taking action was really the wisest thing to do. I buried that creeping dread as deep as I could and returned to thinking about the man in the apartment. The thread had said that he'd appeared at his parents' house on the 24th. I found myself going back to that. And his parents said that he shouldn't have been there. That contradicts what I thought yesterday regarding my own travel. I thought that on the 30th I might have appeared underground at 9:10, where I'd only been minutes prior. Plenty of travels had happened in the tower can fit that idea, but there were already some that didn't, and neither does this one. If his parents said that he shouldn't have been there on the 24th, it can't be that it was a coordinate mere minutes away from the point he appeared. But of course, his parents' house isn't a random position. It definitely had to be based on one from his past. Admittedly, thinking about that was frustrating. I'd gone over similar thoughts so many times, but it didn't seem like reaching a conclusion was feasible, and especially not when I couldn't know if the Sekimeiya was consistent. What? I stopped myself in the middle of the street. Ahead of me, I'd seen something I recognized. The very same stare I'd just been given. Someone else who I didn't recognize had suddenly looked at me like that, but when I noticed it, they'd been looking somewhere else. Am I just imagining it? Am I just paranoid after the first time? I spun around me, and after a full circle, my heart hammered once. All around, I'd seen people fixing their eyes on me. I spun once again, more slowly. Afterward, I closed my eyes. I hadn't seen a single person looking at me the second time. I really am making it up. The thin white trees came back to me, but I was slightly dizzy. I surveyed my surroundings again, and everyone was only looking straight ahead as they walked across the ground. It couldn't be that they know that I should be in hospital, right? That thought made me a little uncomfortable, so I stepped away. It's gotta be just me. Nobody's looking now. Even if that was the case, though, it shouldn't matter. But it still made me uneasy, so I walked toward a narrower branching street, which was much less crowded. I advanced without thinking about where I was going. Eventually, I turned around and still saw no one looking back at me. I'm going the wrong way if I want to go home, though. I moved to the end of the street. There, the atmosphere was completely calm, similar to how things had been that morning. Slightly ahead of me, there was the school I'd always gone to, in front of the end of the mountain range. I kept moving forward, accepting my own improvised detour. Past the corner, I saw a green bus I hadn't noticed beforehand. Making no noise, it crossed my view and disappeared as it curved away. It wasn't common sense to see a bus like that in Yushibana. Since it had been green, I knew it had come from outside town. There were local buses as well, but they were blue and took very few paths. I crossed the road, stepping on the recent wet tracks. I shortly arrived at the entrance to my school. The tunnel I'd come out of 2 days earlier was very close by, and of course, Curator Park too. Like every year, it would spend a few months covered by snow. Without a clear purpose in mind, I strolled over to it, surrounded by pure silence. I could see people in the distance, too tiny to recognize. I pretty much circled around Yushibana, and it was fairly smaller than the perception of it I'd always had. I could make it home without crossing the center again, so I headed toward the path I'd often taken after class. However, I'd abruptly forced my legs to stop. Am I just stressed out? I kept walking, shrugging off whatever was up with me, but I soon had to stop again. Perhaps I'd sharpened my senses during the hours I'd spent on the edge in the tower. Nobody seemed to be behind me, but something inside me had told me otherwise. The first time, I turned around after stopping, and I hadn't seen anyone. The second, I hadn't sensed anything, but I wanted to make sure. Have I hit the point of thinking that I'm being followed? I should just make it home. I continued walking around the rim of Yushibana, slightly on alert. The sound of my footsteps was all I picked up. I looked at the sky and noticed the dense white clouds. In the park, I felt that there was movement behind me as soon as I'd started to walk. With how likely it was that I'd been mistaken, that proved that I was more nervous than I thought. That time when I stopped myself, I didn't just look back. I turned around and ran toward the way I come. I didn't immediately see anyone. Seconds later, I'd covered quite a bit of distance and nobody had come into view yet. But when I looked down, my heart sank like a stone. Footprints. They weren't mine, and I hadn't seen them seconds earlier. They came from the park, hugging the edge and then disappeared toward the faraway trees. Was I not imagining anything? Am I actually being followed? The footprints were too big to be my own, and I noticed a detail that reinforced my fear. As soon as they turned toward the trees, the distance between each step increased. Did they run away the moment I looked back? It had become more than just paranoia. I turned around to my previous path and sped up considerably. Who would follow me though? Is it someone else who travelled to the past? I couldn't think of many possibilities. I knew the past wasn't guaranteed to repeat, but even if someone who knew me, like Atsuki, had seen me, they wouldn't have run away as soon as I'd noticed them. The path was mostly straight to my apartment. It wasn't too cold, so I didn't slow down. On the way, I crossed paths with a neighbour of mine. Naturally, her footprints didn't match the ones that I'd seen. I slowed down when I got to the metallic staircase and opened up my door. I glanced all around me before opening it. I didn't see anyone. I panted for a bit, the comforting warmth helping me to calm down. After some time, I shrugged off my coat and boots. I really didn't like having to feel wary, even in my apartment, but I couldn't shake it. Was it possible I was mistaken? I couldn't really put into words why I'd felt someone had been behind me, so I tried to believe that I'd made it all up. The grass had been covered in footprints. Even if the ones I'd seen had looked more recent than the others, it didn't prove anything. What would be the reason behind following me? B. To confirm that it was me, because I should be in the hospital? It wouldn't be to hurt me, right? If it was someone from Shin who travelled to the past, would I actually be seen as a threat to them? If they know that I should be in the hospital, they could figure out that if another version of me exists, I must have travelled from the future. I had a building headache, and I'd been sweating profusely for a while. I thought about turning up the heater, but I chose to try and loosen up instead. And with that, we need to wrap this episode up here because we are out of time. Once again, this is the interesting part. I'm really into this wandering around Yushibana trying to figure out what to do part. Not that we're getting a hell of a lot done. Maybe I just like not being in the tower anymore. That's nice. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Thanks again, Alfie, and I'll see you in the next one.